Donald Trump leads Joe Biden by a record 4.3% nationally and has reached an all-time high favorability rating of negative 7.7. Meanwhile, Biden's approval sits at an abysmal negative 16 points. Going into March, Trump has never been in as strong of a position as he is in now. With the election nearing, the big question is, has he done enough? In this video, we'll take a look at my updated 2024 electoral map prediction and see how many electoral votes the former president is on track to win in November. Looking at the map, we're going to begin by filling in the solid states. These states are states that have an over 99% chance at voting for either Biden or Trump, and the margins in these states will likely be by 12 percentage points or more in favor of either of the two candidates. Starting off with the solid states for Biden, we have Washington, California, Hawaii, as well as Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, his home state of Delaware, Maryland, the District of Columbia, and the 1st District of Maine. This gives the incumbent president 105 electoral votes. As for Trump, there is a significantly longer list of these solid states. Trump is simply too popular right now to win any of these states by margins less than 12. His solid states include Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, North and South Dakota, as well as nearly the entirety of Nebraska, with the exception of the competitive 2nd District, and then all of these states in the Deep South: Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Indiana. This is Mike Pence's home state, even though Trump is not going to run with them this time around, as well as South Carolina, Alaska, and the 2nd District of Maine, giving the former president 126 electoral votes. We're also going to include the states of Iowa and Ohio. These two states are not typically solid red. They were very competitive in the Obama era and were supposed to be close in 2020 as well. However, Donald Trump absolutely destroyed Biden in these two states, winning them by nearly 10%. And with Trump more popular than he's ever been, he is going to easily carry these two Midwestern states by a 12-point margin this November. Before we continue, only 13% of you guys are subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe and join my Discord server to chat with me personally. And now we're going to move on to categorizing the likely states. These are states that will vote for either Biden or Trump by margins between 5 and 12%. These states are going to be slightly more competitive. You might see the candidates visiting them. For example, Biden might visit a state like Texas, or Trump might go to a state like Colorado once or twice, but they know that they're probably not going to win. I would say less than a 5% chance at winning for the other candidate. However, when you look at the map here, a lot of states Biden won by a solid margin in 2020 are going to be a lot closer, and most of those states are going to be his likely states this time around. So Joe Biden is still going to win a state like Oregon. It's just going to be a lot closer. Colorado is going to be likely as well, and so will the state of Illinois, the home state of Barack Obama. It was very solid blue over the last decade, but we are seeing things start to tighten up. We're seeing a similar trend in the Empire State of New York, 28 electoral votes. New York is not the state that it once was. It is no longer that solid blue stronghold. As we saw in 2022, Republicans won many House seats there. That was the main reason why they were even able to win the House at all. If it wasn't for New York, Democrats would probably have a very narrow majority in the lower chamber. Kathy Hochul also won re-election by less than 10 points against Lee Zeldin, one of the closest gubernatorial elections in the state in decades. And so New York is no longer going to be solid blue. It will be a firm contender for that likely category. Connecticut is also going to be likely, and so will New Jersey, but these are pretty obvious wins for the incumbent president. And so with all of Joe Biden's likely states filled in along with the solid ones, we have 191 electoral votes going for the incumbent. And now moving on to the likely Trump states. There's going to be a lot of them as well. As the country becomes more polarized, more and more states are going to fall strictly on either end of the spectrum, with only a few competitive states that will actually decide our elections. The big likely state for Trump is, of course, going to be Texas, 40 electoral votes. This is not a state that he's always done well in. If you look at 2020, Trump only won Florida by 5.6%. In 2016, that margin was 9, and the last time that a Republican won Texas by less than 5 points was Bob Dole in 1996. So Trump's performance in the last election in Texas wasn't the greatest, but it is definitely going to improve this November up to a margin around 10 points. In Florida, this is now the second biggest likely state for the GOP, 30 electoral votes. On the gubernatorial level, on the senatorial level, this state is a solid GOP state. Marco Rubio won his re-election by 15 points last year, and with Ron DeSantis winning his re-election as governor by 20%. On the presidential level, though, it is, of course, going to be closer, but not as close as it was in 2020. Trump won Florida by 3.4%. Even back in 2008, when Barack Obama won the election with 365 electoral votes, he only won Florida by 2.8%. So Florida, a state that's been competitive for decades after Trump came into the scene, is no longer nearly as close as it's been for the best part of a half century. And so this will give Trump 219 electoral votes with just his two biggest likely states. In North Carolina and Georgia, we have two states that are pretty similar to Florida. They were very competitive in 2020, but they're probably not going to be nearly as close in 2024. In North Carolina, the state only voted for Trump by 1.3% in 2020. However, this November, it is not even going to be close. Donald Trump leads Joe Biden by around 7% in the polling from the Tar Heel state, and by a very similar margin in Georgia, despite Joe Biden's victory in the Peach State in the previous election by a 0.24% margin. This was a widely contested state before and after the election, and with Joe Biden so unpopular, Georgia is probably going to be the first state to go. Even if Joe Biden somehow wins the election, Donald Trump is still going to win Georgia. That is something that I feel pretty confident about. It's going to be very, very difficult to see the incumbent president holding on to a state he won so narrowly when he is just so unpopular. So both North Carolina and Georgia in 2024 are going to be likely Trump states. Now moving into the lean states, these are states where at this point both candidates have a good chance at winning. However, one candidate does definitely hold an advantage, and these are states that will go for either candidate by margins between 1 and 5%. So they're definitely going to be closer, but for some of these states, one candidate is still favored. In New Mexico, 5 electoral votes, we have it going for Joe Biden. Joe Biden won the state by double digits in 2020, but it's going to be a lot closer this time around, especially considering how Hispanic voters are continuing to shift away from the Democratic Party, and New Mexico is the only state with a Hispanic majority. As more people in that group are moving to the right, Republicans are only going to do better and better in New Mexico in the next few years, and potentially in the next few decades. At some point, they could actually win the state. In Virginia, we have another really competitive state, 13 electoral votes. Joe Biden also won the Commonwealth of Virginia by 10% in 2020. However, in 2021, Glenn Youngkin actually won the governorship there, and that's made Virginia a lot more competitive than it was just a few years ago, and that's why it's only going to be lean in the Biden category. New Hampshire is also going to be pretty close. This will put Biden up at 213. The state voted for the now president by 7 points in 2020. However, look back at 2016, Hillary Clinton only won New Hampshire by 0.37%. I think Biden is definitely still favored in the Granite State, but not nearly by as much as he was last time. And also, the 2nd District of Maine is going to be close as well. The most recent poll from the state shows Trump behind by just 1% statewide, as he's made a lot of gains in that crucial 2nd District, which was a district that Barack Obama won in 2012 by 8.6%, but then you just shift over to 2020, Trump wins it. Now, before we even move on to the lean states for Trump, he's already at 251 electoral votes, only 19 away from the presidency. I mean, just look at the map in 2020. He was at 232. He didn't win Georgia. He barely won North Carolina. Florida was close. Iowa and Ohio weren't solid. But look at the map now. I mean, there's just so much red and so much of this deeper, darker red. And so as we move into the lean column for Trump, we're going to see a lot of states that were still very, very competitive in 2020 that Trump now has a clear advantage in. So Arizona is going to be that first lean state. We have 11 electoral votes here, a state that he lost in 2020 by 0.31%. And I mean, just logically, Joe Biden, the most unpopular president in modern history, he has a 38% approval. That's honestly being generous. In some polls, he's actually in the low 30s, sometimes 35, 34. And then when you look at the 2020 map, states like Georgia and Arizona that went for him by less than 0.5%, is he really going to win them? The answer is probably no, which is why Donald Trump is heavily now favored in both Georgia and Arizona. These are two major flips for the former president. He is also favored in the state of Wisconsin, 10 electoral votes, another state that Biden barely won last time. As you can see here, 0.63%. And out of all four of these upper Rust Belt states, in every single election over the last decade, nearly every single one, Wisconsin has always been the most conservative. And if any of these states are going to vote to the right of their margins in 2020, Wisconsin is going to move the furthest. Michigan is going to be lean Republican as well. Trump leads by over 5% in the state. It's really not even going to be close if you just look at the numbers. And if you look at the election results from 2016, Trump won all three of these upper Rust Belt states after Obama won them by likely margins just 4 years prior. That is the impact Trump has had. I mean, also in states like Ohio, Iowa, even Minnesota. Donald Trump has performed so well for the GOP in the Midwest. He has destroyed the blue wall states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, which have given Democrats election victories for nearly 3 decades. I mean, even in 2004, John Kerry won all three of them. 2000 as well, Al Gore wins the blue wall. Bill Clinton won them by even larger margins in 1992 and 1996. So Donald Trump's probably his biggest electoral contribution to the GOP is breaking through that blue wall, and in 2020, he very narrowly lost them. Now, with Joe Biden held responsible for the problems in this country today, with inflation, with just the economy doing poorly, as well as America's position on the international stage, Donald Trump is going to be in a very favorable position to win these states that he won 8 years ago and put them back into the Republican category. We're now left with just 3 states, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, and Nevada. These are going to be the tilt states, categorized by margins less than 1%. They really could go both ways, but I am still going to fill them in just so that you guys can see a full completed map. In Nevada, I have Trump slightly favored, 6 electoral votes, a state he never won before in the last 2 elections, a state that Obama won by 13% in 2008, down to just 2.4% in the last 2 electoral cycles. And going into 2024, we saw in 2022 that Joe Lombardo, a Republican, defeated incumbent Democratic Governor Steve Sisolak in 2022. And so that was a major victory for the Nevada GOP. They weren't able to do as well with the Senate election because they had a worse candidate running against Catherine Cortez Masto. But overall, Nevada has shifted to the right, and so has Pennsylvania, 19 electoral votes. Out of the 3 upper Rust Belt states, I do believe that Pennsylvania is going to be the closest. If Joe Biden's going to win any of them, it is going to be his birth state, the Keystone State of Pennsylvania. However, Donald Trump does have an advantage in this state as well. And the only tilt state for Joe Biden on this map is going to be Minnesota. It was very close in 2016. Polls are predicting a very close election again. Joe Biden was supposed to win Minnesota by a double-digit margin last time. He wasn't able to do it. He's probably going to underperform again. But Minnesota, the state with the longest Democratic voting history, I do believe, is still going to vote blue, at least as at as of this time. And in the 2nd District of Nebraska, just one electoral vote. I have Donald Trump winning it back after Joe Biden came out with a 6-point victory in the previous election. And so this is my updated 2024 presidential election prediction. Donald Trump will win re-election with 313 electoral votes, a very solid victory over Joe Biden with 225, which means that the former president is currently on track to return to the White House.